an opportunity to talk about what happens behind the closed doors of therapy, giving you topics that I talk about with my clients with the hopes that you too can learn the skills and strategies needed to live your best life. Don't forget to subscribe, check out my previous videos because there are some great gems, some nuggets in them all, and so make sure you check it out. I'm Natasha, and today we're going to be talking about grieving the ideal of relationships. I know we're going to get deep today. We are going to get deep today. So just get ready, clutch your pearls, be ready to speak your truth because it's going to get real. So we often talk about death, dying, loss when we hear or speak about grief. When we think about grief, most people, the first thing that comes to mind is the loss of someone, right? But grief varies. It can be on a larger scale because grief is just the loss of anything. And so that also includes the ideal of something, right? You might have this ideal relationship that you're thinking about or you have in mind, or the type of relationship you would like to have with a certain person. And your hopes have been built into that, your efforts, the reason why you even started the relationship, the fantasy of what the relationship could be falls under all of that. And when it doesn't happen that way, feelings of grief pop up. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Because many times people don't realize that when you're feeling anger about a relationship changing or shifting, or when there's sadness about, the person not being who you thought they were, the relationship not being what you thought or expected it to be, a lot of times it's connected to grief. And so I've talked to many of my clients. I'm thinking of two in particular where I've had this conversation with them. I've had to point out that what you're experiencing is grief right now. That's why you're going through so many different emotions, and helping them recognize how their emotions are very similar to the loss of someone or a person, because they are losing something. They still have the person, but the type of relationship they were expecting or had in mind or hoped for, what they had envisioned, what they had dreamed and fantasized about of what this relationship would look like, is lost. And accepting that is hard because that means either one, they have to let go of the relationship, or two, accept it for what it is. And a lot of times they don't want to do that because they had this expectation for the relationship to provide a certain type of support or love or comfort or connection that for themselves, and it's not doing that. So I have one client who we had this conversation about her brother. She had this idea of the perfect brother-sister relationship, them connecting like when they were kids. They had a really strong relationship when they were kids, and now that they were adults, not so much. And she would get really upset when she wasn't able to have that good connection with her brother. When she would talk to him on the phone, it was never a connection where he asked about what was going on with her. It always ended up being about him and her comforting him or taking care of him and making sure he's okay. And she kept expecting him to respond differently because of the ideal relationship she was looking for. And so I had to help her to recognize, one, you got to recognize where your brother is at, accept him for who he is, because what you're expecting is the opposite. It's causing you not to accept him for who he is, which then leads to frustration that he's not behaving or becoming the person you want him to become. And then recognizing that the person that he is might not be the person that you end up wanting a relationship with. The person that he is might not be or may not be able to be the person you expect him to be. And that caused a lot of revelation for herself. That helped her to really recognize, wow, now I see where this wall is coming from, because I'm having these specific expectations that he can't meet because that's not where he's at. And so it took some time for her to grieve, right? Like a few sessions we had to process her grieving. And she had to cry a lot. She had to accept that this ideal, perfect brother-sister relationship is not going to be what it is, but it doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with your brother. It just means that the relationship is going to be different than what you expected. And that's what she had to accept. I had another client who had friendships for years, and recently it disbanded and the relationship ended. And as she is getting to know more about herself, she's connecting that they weren't really the true friends that she thought they were. And again, I had to help her process how she had this ideal relationship in mind. And because it was this ideal relationship, it was causing her to not really recognize the reality of the relationship. The reality that she had to constantly feel like she had to be somebody else. She had to constantly please. She couldn't be herself around them. When she was judged. So she felt anxious when she was around them. But because she was with them, because she had friendships with them since childhood, this wasn't something she was able to connect to. She wasn't able to make this connection that how I'm feeling is because they're not the type of friends that I need to be having. They're not as close. They don't care for me as much as I think that they do. And so she had to begin to grieve that this connection, this tight bond that she thought she had with her friends really did not exist. And then having to figure out how to move forward, because these were her core people, right? These are the people that she called to hang out with, that she, traveled with, and now leaving them leaves her with no one. And so she had to grieve. Working through that, grieving this loss of the friendships that she thought she had when she really didn't. And so the challenge here today is to think about friendships that aren't working out the way you expect it to, or relationships that aren't working out the way you expect it to, meaning that maybe the expectations aren't being met. There constantly ends up being some disconnection. And you're not recognizing or realizing what it is. You have to ask yourself, what I'm expecting from this relationship, is it the reality of what the relationship can actually give me and what this relationship actually is based on? Because sometimes we get caught up in the fantasy, what we would love this relationship to be, and it takes us from the reality of what it really is, and then we end up in a situation where we are feeling disconnected. We are feeling like we're not able to get what we need from the relationship. We end up staying in relationships that we don't really need to be staying in, right? Or we're just going about it the wrong way, which is causing conflict instead of us accepting the person for who he or she is. Because that's the other part. Because a lot of times the ideal relationship is based on the ideal person, right? It's based on who we would love this person to be. And once you're able to recognize that my expectations is not really based on the reality, then you have to learn to accept the reality and determine, is this something that I want to keep? Is this relationship something I can keep? I want to keep. And now that I'm recognizing that the fantasy is not based on reality, can I still be in this relationship based on the reality of what it is? And allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to grieve. Because there can be a lot of sadness and disappointment that what you thought this relationship was going to be is never going to be that. Because that's not really what the reality of the relationship is. And that's going to cause some grief. You might have some feelings of anger and sadness, very similar to grief of a loss of a loved one, because you are losing something. You're losing the ideal relationship that you had in mind. And so it's okay to grieve that. But it's time to really check to see the expectations I have, what I'm envisioning this relationship to be. Is that the reality of this actual relationship? I'm going to leave that right there, because that's going to cause a lot of It's going to make you really sit and think and process. So just process that. You might not even have the answer today, and that's okay. Just sit and process that. Make sure you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, check out past videos because there's all types of gems in there. Also, follow me on Instagram at speaklife_SLT and Facebook at Live and Speak Life. Check out my website, speaklifetransformation.com. And until I see you guys again, make sure you're being safe, be bold, and speak life.